The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent, including Olas Media.
Olas Media. Olas Media presents Cannabis Enlightened, produced in San Diego, California. Now here's your host, Dr. Leroy Brady.
You know, this is a dream come true. I am in Hawaii, I'm in Maui, at the Fairmont Hotel, and I'm just having a wonderful time. The room I'm staying in is so nice, everyone, so nice that I took pictures and I sent it back to my relatives. So I am down-to-earth person. I'm not used to this kind of thing, but Hawaii is absolutely beautiful, and I love it, and I'm already planning to come back. This special edition of Cannabis Enlightened, as I am your host, Dr. Leroy, is extra special because we're going to be talking about the importance of voting with this. And I'm attending a conference, believe it or not. People have a hard time believing that I am at a conference in Hawaii. But I tell them, yes, I'm at a conference in Hawaii, and it's being sponsored by the Independent Voter Project. Independent Voter Project. And the head of that project, the executive director, is Dan Howle. And I have Dan here with me. And Dan, would you come on and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about, how you came about being the executive director?
I'm Dan Howle. I'm as Dr. Leroy said, I'm the executive director of the Independent Voter Project. It's an organization that was founded in 2006 by former state senator Steve Peace and myself and another individual, David Takashima. David and I were both chiefs of staff to Senator Peace, and we had all left the legislature in the very early part of the 21st century. Between 2001 and 2003, we all left the legislature. And in the ensuing 2 or 3 years, we started to talk to each other about when we were in the legislature and the way the legislature operated and the value of it. I started working in the California legislature in 1974. So by the time you got to the year 2000, I'd been there for a long time.
Right.
Same thing with Senator Peace and same thing with David Takashima. And one of the things that we felt sort of a responsibility for was that over the tenure that we were there, the legislature became much more partisan, and it became much more, it didn't have the depth that it used to have.
And Dan, when we talk about partisan, we're saying that people would vote only one way, vote only Republican or only Democrat?
Yes, that's
okay.
That's what's happening now.
Okay.
But it didn't used to be that way.
Regardless of the issue.
Regardless of the issue.
Okay.
The legislature in the 70s and the 80s and into the 90s, the legislature in California was, I think, on par with Congress. There were really substantive hearings on issues. There was great deal of bipartisanship. There was camaraderie, right, where it didn't matter what party you were, you remained friends, even when you disagreed and you argued. Right. You didn't take it home with you. And over the course of time, it became more and more and more partisan. And we thought that it was getting to a point where voters were really dissatisfied and disenfranchised, and we sat and we thought about what are the things that we can do to improve politics in California. Mm-hmm. And one of the things we focused on was that elections in California weren't competitive. Mm. They were being decided in primary elections where the fewest number of people voted. So you had a smaller universe of people, right, who were determining who the nominees were, and because of closed primaries, Democrats who won the primary were automatically elected in November. There really wasn't any competition. And so Steve Peace, I think in the late 90s, there was an initiative, or there was for one term, there was an open primary law. And Steve, as a member of the legislature, remarked how the behavior of legislators changed remarkably when there was open primaries. Legislators became aware that they couldn't just go back to their district and just focus on their own political party. They had to do something to appeal to independent voters, and they had to do something to appeal to the voters of the opposite party. Because in an open primary, if you don't appeal to everyone, then your opponent may do that, and you may win the vote in your own party, but lose the independents and lose the opposite party and not be successful, not get reelected.
So you'd lose the general.
Yeah, you'd lose in the general election.
Okay.
And the California Supreme Court overturned that open primary law, and they did it based on the fact that political parties are private organizations, and they have a right to determine who is affiliated with a political party. So we decided we're going to redo that. We're going to but we're going to write it the correct way this time. So we hired lawyers and spent a lot of money with lawyers, both constitutional lawyers and political lawyers, so that we would write an initiative that would stand up to a constitutional challenge. So one of the big things in the initiative is that in California, no one registers with a political party affiliation anymore.
Okay.
When you register to vote, you state a political party preference, and there's a real distinction between affiliation and preference. With preference, you're not violating the rights of association of the political parties.
Okay.
And so that's the big piece that has stood up to a number of constitutional challenges. And so what happened was in 2010, the initiative was on the ballot in California, and it passed. And it passed because independent voters turned out in record numbers in the primary election, because there was an initiative on the ballot that gave them the right to vote for anybody they wanted to in primary election.
I was just going to ask you if this new method, this way of putting forth a initiative, brought more people out to vote.
It certainly did in the primary in 2010. We compared 2010, a non-presidential year for a primary, with 2008, which is a presidential year for a primary.
Right.
And we turned out about 400,000 more independent voters in 2010 than in 2008. Wow. And it was because there was an initiative on the ballot that was sort of an apolitical issue. It was a voting rights issue, and it appealed to them. We also knew from polling and research and focus groups that about 30% of the people in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party really liked the idea of being able to vote for someone not in that party if they wanted to. And under the closed primary system, they didn't have that opportunity.
So Democrats would vote, a Democrat could vote for a Republican.
Yes.
Because possibly they liked what that Republican was backing.
Right.
Okay. Not just because,
correct,
well, I can't vote for that person because they're Republican and I'm a Democrat.
That's right. They may have, in a state assembly, they may have in their area, they may have a congressional race, a state senate race, and a legislative race, and they might think one of the Republican candidates is more in tune to what their values are. Right. And in a primary election, they weren't allowed to vote for a Republican. They had only Democratic choices. End result of that is California went in one election cycle from the least competitive legislative and congressional districts in the country to the most competitive.
Wow, that's phenomenal.
And all of a sudden, every voter in California was on equal status.
Wow. Wow. Then did that change the type of politician that would be coming to Sacramento?
Yeah. Yes. Not universally. And the best way for me to describe it is we have 52 states, and in a presidential election, 42 of them are pretty much predetermined because they're either Republican states or Democratic. But there's 8 states that are competitive. Mm-hmm. Well, in the election process, there's every 2 years there's 100 legislative seats up for election, 80 in the Assembly, 20 in the Senate, and of that 100, there's probably 95 to 100 that are, because of the registration numbers and the districting, those seats are going to be either a Democratic seat or a Republican seat.
Right.
And then there's 8 or 10 that are just flat out competitive seats. So in those seats, anybody can win. And what makes a solid Democratic seat more competitive and a solid Republican seat more competitive is, with the open primary, you can have 2 Democrats on the ballot, and when you have 2 Democrats on the ballot, they're both competing for Democratic votes. But now, in order to win, they have to compete for Republican and independent votes. Whereas in a solid Democratic district, if it was a Democrat and a Republican on the ballot, and the opposite, in a Republican district, the Republican or the Democrat automatically got elected. They didn't have to communicate with anybody other than the Democrats or the Republicans, their own political party. And that changed dramatically. So the behavior of legislators is they have to pay a lot more attention to the constituents who are not part of the political party that they prefer.
They got to pay attention to everybody.
Yes, they have to pay attention to everybody, and so you get a more moderate legislature.
Okay, all right. So the Independent Voter Project is not just interested in getting people to vote. It sounds like it's much bigger than that.
Oh yes, open primaries is just one facet of what the Independent Voter Project is trying to do. We're part of a national organization. It's called the National Association of Nonpartisan Reformers, and that organization supports citizens redistricting commissions to take the redistricting of congressional and legislative seats away from the hands of those who do it in their own self-interest and do it in a much more fair way. California has a citizens redistricting commission, and it's significantly more fair, and districts are drawn more fairly than when the legislature does it. And we've been able to pass that in a few other states around the country, and that's part of what we do is we support that. We support ranked choice voting. And it's getting past the experimental stage, ranked choice voting, and more places are choosing the ranked choice voting method. The state of Maine and the state of Alaska both have adopted ranked choice voting for all of their races, governor down to the state legislature.
Right.
Cities and counties all over the country are choosing ranked choice voting. And gives voters the ability to choose, to show their preference for more than one person.
Right.
Because a lot of times people will go and they'll vote, but there's somebody whose philosophy is very close to and they're supportive of. And
so, Dan, I want to get back to, in our closing minutes, I want to get back to the fact that this is, the Independent Voter Project has helped to, it sounds like, it's helped to reshape the kind of politician that's going to bring themselves before the public.
in many cases, yes, because there are far more competitive legislative districts than there have been in the past. You have legislative districts now and congressional districts too, where you have more people who are getting elected who are forced to, whether they like it or not,
Right.
appeal to a much broader range of voters.
Right.
And I think it's had a significant impact on enough of the politicians so that it makes a difference in how they vote.
Well, let me ask you this then. I know we're at the conference. We're at the conference here in Hawaii.
Right.
Which I know listeners have a hard time believing we're at a conference in Hawaii, but you will attest to that, right?
Yes, we're here and we're in Hawaii, and we've been here for 17 years. It's not a new thing. We've been here for 17 years.
And educating, trying to help educate.
What we do is we bring public employee unions, we bring individuals, we bring businesses together with members of the legislature from multiple states
Right.
to talk about issues in a very candid conversations. One of the good things that we have right now, we have legislators here from Texas, second largest country in state in the United States,
Right.
and from California, largest state in the United States population-wise. If you take a look at the demographics of those two states, they're virtually the same. Same number, same percentage of Hispanics and African Americans and Asians and Caucasians. So they're very, very similar in that way. They're oil producing states. They're big tech states. They're big agriculture states. So they have lots and lots of things in common, but politically there couldn't be more polar opposite. And so it's very beneficial for the legislators from those two states to spend time sitting and talking to each other to see how they solve problems very differently, but solve problems.
Right.
And so one of the most popular things about bringing these people together is the feedback I get from legislators from these states who say, you know what, I never thought of it from that perspective, or you know how they're solving this problem in Texas, and we should probably think about doing that in California, and vice versa.
Wow.
And it's also an opportunity for businesses to sit down and talk very candidly about what their issues are.
Wow.
Now, I will say that we have some conditions for that. We don't allow lobbying. We don't allow conversations about specific legislation, and we monitor that very carefully because we don't want this to turn into a lobbying exercise. We want this to be pure public policy discussions, and we're very, very strict about that. There have been a few people who haven't been invited back because they didn't pay attention and didn't follow the rules.
They're not following the rules.
That's right.
Gotcha. So, Dan, we've talked here about the functioning, and if I can say, the power of the Independent Voter Project. Can you give me an example of a situation in which it's been very useful to have this organization and to contact people, to contact lawmakers?
Sure. Let's talk about cannabis just for a second. Cannabis was approved on through a statewide initiative.
It was,
and it was on. I believe it was on the June primary ballot. And because the Independent Voter Project changed the election process, there are a lot more independent voters voting in primary elections. And so there was a much higher turnout of, and quite frankly, independent voters or independent thinking. And I think that they had an impact on the success of that initiative. So what we do at the Independent Voter Project is we think, bottom line is, the best elections are the elections where the most people vote. And what we've been able to do is significantly increase participation in primary elections.
Right.
So more people are voting in California. That's just one example where the voters they had the opportunity to take a look at a controversial subject and make the right decision.
And it's a powerful example.
Yes. So
thank you very much.
So I'm glad that we were able to play a little part in the success of that initiative.
I think you played more than a little part, but thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I can bet you that after listening to this, many of the people in my audience will want to get in touch with you, will want to get involved in the Independent Voter Project. How would they do that?
Well, one of the things that, first of all, this event here in Hawaii it's more than just a meeting of the minds.
Okay.
It's a fundraiser. We're a little bit like public radio.
Okay.
And public television. We rely on donations for us to operate. The Independent Voter Project has an online news site. It is ivn.us. It's got over 500,000 Facebook followers.
Wow.
It is consistently rated by the rating organizations that rate news sites as one of the most nonpartisan news sites available on the internet.
Right.
So we're involved. The content changes every single day, and we present a very broad range of issues. Incidentally, when we were trying to pass our top two nonpartisan open primary, we gave the opposition more space and time on our website than we did promoting the top two nonpartisan to make sure that we practiced what we preached.
Wow.
So the conference has been very successful, but it's also the way the method that we use to raise money to be able to operate on an annual basis.
based upon the things you've said, I know there are going to be people that want to get involved because you're providing them with a new way to get involved without being partisan, without having to go down the Republican lane or down the Democratic lane. Freer thinking.
Right.
So
IVN.us, our online news site, is an open platform.
Okay.
So anyone can submit an article for us to consider for publication. We can't publish them all, but we'll consider everything. We have very strict etiquette guidelines on our online news site. We don't allow any personal attacks, which is right at the top of the list, but we try to maintain a very high level of civility.
absolutely.
So
Right.
I would recommend that your voters go and visit our news site, IVN.us, so they get a better idea of what we are and what we're trying to do. And then also visit our website, the independentvoterproject.org. And on that, there's directions and the ability to contact us. You can reach me at dan@independentvoterproject.org. I go through all the email and I check it all the time, and I'm responding to people on a regular basis. Some people who like what we're doing, and some people who just really don't. But
That's a life.
But I much rather talk to people who don't like what we're doing, so we can have a conversation about that. Because with a little bit of time and effort, I can get them to come around and see what we're trying to do and see the value of what we're doing.
I have no doubt, Dan, that you are a very persuasive individual in a kind, civil manner. And on that note, I want to thank you, give you a deep thanks for giving up your time, because you've been busy this entire week.
Yeah, it's a busy week.
And I don't know if you slept during this time frame.
About 2 or 3 hours a night.
Okay. Well, thank you again, and I really appreciate this opportunity to chat with you and to bring more information to listeners about voting and the power of voting. So
Well,
thank you very
for
much.
having me. I appreciate it.
This is Dr. Leroy, host of Cannabis Enlightened, which is brought to you by March and Ash. If you like this episode and want to listen to other episodes, please link in to cannabisenlightened.com. And if you'd like to send me an email, a comment, a question, or just to say hi, you can send it to Dr. Leroy at cannabisenlightened.com. And remember, knowledge is power.
Olas Media.